I think everybody here I know, we all know each other. So I'll just be really quick for the purpose of the people who may watch us recording in the future. I see we're now being recorded. Thank you, Dan. Uh, this is Know Before You Grow, a committee of Petaluma Urban Chat. The mission statement of Urban Chat is really quite simple: adequate housing to meet community needs, mobility alternatives that don't involve private cars, climate action, and sustainable municipal finances. Of course, I describe that as a simple mission statement, and those are four near impossibilities, but nonetheless, it's easily expressed. And we don't view those topics as being in their own silos. Any solution we look at for land use has to integrate all four of those to meet what we think is appropriate. And we often talk about walkable urbanism as our key point. We don't necessarily say walkable urbanism is the only way to meet those four, but I think it's the only one yet been discovered. So take that for what it's worth. For visiting dignitaries, I think the only name I put down here is Councilmember Frank Quint. Frank, glad to have you here this evening.
Glad to
Uh,
be here. Thank
Three
you.
members of the Urban Chat board are here, Dan, me, and then also Kevin Goulding is there. So we have a quorum of our board. Appreciate that, guys. Looking at future events for Urban Chat, a week from the night, we'll have our board meeting, and there will be some interesting topics that night. Our board meetings are always open to the public. If you want to join us, you're welcome. I'm not sure where the meeting will be yet. Take a look at our calendar on our website, urbanchat.org, if you want to track us down. The day after that, that would be Thursday, a week from tomorrow, will be our last monthly lunch of the year. It will be pre-Christmas, pre-holidays. We will do some festive celebration in a modest sort of way, but as always, just good urban conversations. For 2026, we have so many great ideas lined out for Know Before You Grow. I don't want to tell you what they are because I'm not sure how they're all going to fit together, but it's going to be a big year. Tomorrow, you will be getting a request that you join Urban Chat. We will never put anything we do behind a paywall. You can always come to this meeting without being an Urban Chat member. But if you want to make these kind of meetings happen, joining would be much appreciated. Look for that email, and we hope to have you on our membership rolls fairly soon. This end of the evening, or after Carter's presentation, we will do some Q&A. If you want to put any questions on the chat function, that will be great. I will sort of grab the ones that seem representative, but we'll also try to leave some time for you to ask questions verbally if that is your preferred way to interact with us. Tonight's speaker was connected to us by Dan Like, so I am not going to presume that I should be the introducer. Dan is going to handle that, and take it from here, Dan. Thanks a lot.
Well, I met Carter when he got 30 people to show up in my backyard for an event that he doesn't like to talk about while we're being recorded. Um, but the that kind of brought home that Carter is able to organize people well. And when I got his book, I pre-ordered it and read through it, and I don't think there was anything that struck me as particularly groundbreaking, but it felt like the sort of book that is going to sit on my shelf, and I am going to reread it occasionally when I need to be re-inspired and find direction again. So I'm not sure what more I can add to it. Carter, take it away.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate that warm intro. Not particularly groundbreaking. While I think you are right in the sense of I'm not inventing the wheel. I didn't invent the concept of pastries, but I think I took flour, sugar, butter, made some pretty fun stuff for some folks. And so it's really great meeting you all. My name's Carter Lavin. I am the author of the book, If You Want to Win, You've Got to Fight, A Guide to Effective Transportation Advocacy, which just came out from Island Press about a month ago. So it's been very exciting. I also locally in the Bay Area, I lead the Trans Bay Coalition. We are a 9-county grassroots advocacy group. We've recently helped spin up North Bay Transit Riders to help focus a lot on the kind of bus aspect of what's going on. We also love smart. So I do a lot of organizing, I do a lot of advocating, and I do it all on, transit, transportation, bikes, walkability, accessibility, and the urban environment. And so I'm excited to chat with you all a little bit today about how we fight and how do we win. So with that, I'm gonna walk us through a little bit of a quick presentation. All right with you? Great, slides up, slides show. And also, forgive me, I've been talking about the regional measure in the southern 5 Bay Area counties all day, every day for the last like month, doing a million presentations about that. This is one of the first conversations I'm not having about that effort in a while. So if I accidentally start talking about Samtrans, that's I short-circuited. So great. I'm just going to talk about, if you want to win, you got to fight, a brief guide to becoming a more effective advocate. So by way of introductions, as I mentioned, Carter Lavin, lovely to meet you. Outside of this stuff, I've also helped win millions of dollars for funding for safer streets in Oakland. I was one of the leads on the effort to get that $750 million loan in state funding for transit in the southern part of the Bay Area, the other Bay Area counties. We got Gavin Newsom a couple years ago to reverse his proposed cuts of $2 billion to transit and $1 billion increase, and also help stop a fare rate increase in the Bay Area, in the East Bay. So I do a lot of things. So if you don't mind putting in the chat your name, your town, which I guess is Petaluma, and something you'd like to learn today. There's a million places you could be right now. There's a lot of things you could be doing. There's a lot of different screens and tabs you could have up. Netflix is just a couple clicks away. So I'd love to hear what brought you to this one. So if you could put that in the chat, that'd be a great place to start for some folks. Got Leslie, Petaluma, how to get government to listen. I like it. Eric, best way to appeal to local businesses for walkability. These are good ones. And one or two more, I'll get going. Yeah, so we're going to talk definitely about these. Nathan, how to advocate to keep, how to get advocates to keep participating in projects that are years long. I talked very explicitly about that in chapters 2 and 4. So I'm glad you asked that one. But yeah, so we got a lot of different stuff. And how do we play the long game without getting spread too thin? Great. We're going to talk through a lot of these things. So just taking a step back, as what we're even talking about becoming a more effective advocate and why. Now, there's a lot of things to want and to win in the world. You could want a bike lane, you could want protected bus shelters or stops, you could want a speed bump, accessible communities, an end to the school drop-off line and pickup line, or you could want the high-speed rail network. There's a million things to want, and you can make them a reality. And it's pretty simple. It's actually fairly straightforward of affecting change, of like how it happens. It's when you get the people who have the authority and power to enact a change, when they say yes and they follow through, you win. That's really all there is to it. Then the change you want becomes reality. Much like, how do you do a backflip? You jump up, you flip back, you land. Easy as that. So just to kind of reiterate, like when the officials in charge of approving and funding and designing these types of things say yes and they follow through, then you win the change you want. Which gets us to like, okay, what is actually the hard part? Well, so how do you influence those decisions? What do you do about that? And I think for this part, we probably don't have so many people on the inside space of like people who work for city governments, but we could talk about that too at the end. So first off, as we're talking about, like politics is made of people. Everyone we're talking about, all these things, this is like Caltrans doesn't exist. SMART doesn't exist. Those are a bunch of people. They have a legal name as they operate together. The city of Petaluma is an imaginary concept, and it's just a whole bunch of people together. And it's just always really helpful to keep that in mind, because a lot of times people say, oh, well, Clipper broke, the Clipper 2 day, that didn't work out because Clippers sucks. It's like, okay, well, who's Clipper? Is like, that's actually a amalgamation of people and rules and things like that. So it's always really good just to remember we're talking people. So elected officials, government staffers, business owners, we are always talking about people. Their decision affects the world around them, and we can influence those decisions. Influencing decisions takes power. This is a quote from Laura Chu Weens, who's the executive director of Pittsburghers for Public Transit, who I interviewed a lot for my book. I interviewed successful advocates, dozens of them from across the country. And she said, when it comes to winning, it doesn't matter if you're right. It never matters if you're right. You just have to have the power to win the thing. Beyond helping motivate our side, being right has never helped us win anything. And that's a hard, big concept, and especially for crowds like ours, like people like us, because we are right. Kids getting hit by cars is bad. We should stop that. We do have infrastructure to stop that. Not being able to get where you need is bad. We have ways of solving this. Traffic on the 101 is terrible. Widening it doesn't work. We have answers. We are right. And a lot of time we get our butts kicked. So we have to actually build the power, as Laura Chuween says, to win the thing that we want. And there's 5 steps to building power. It's fairly straightforward. We're going to go through each of these quickly as just a whole, so you have the whole sense, and then we'll do it slowly. Step 1, you got to define the change you want. As some people are putting in the chat, like, oh, I want the businesses to like this thing, or I want this politician to listen to me. We are doing it for a purpose. It is not just, I want the business to feel warm and fuzzy about bikes in general, which helps. Generally, it's like we want them to feel warm and fuzzy about that one bike thing that we're trying to get. So defining what we want is very helpful. Identifying the decision makers. So as we're talking about businesses or local electeds and things like that, it matters if you're talking to a city council member or a county supervisor. They have very different powers. They have very different abilities. And so identifying what they can do and what the extent of that really matters. You need to make a plan. You need to have tools. You need to craft your message. Basically, how are you connecting these points together? How are you sewing them together? Then also you need to get them more people involved. At the end of the day, if Dan does all the stuff himself, people say, oh, wow, Dan really likes that. You're like, okay, cool. That's Dan's opinion. Dan's wonderful. What does everyone else think? Like, you inherently need to get more people involved. And then lastly, which is a really important step, you have to hold makers accountable. We'll talk a lot about that because that comes up a lot. So let's slow it down a bit. Step 1, defining the change you want. Here's just a picture of kind of like any suburban town in America. There's at least half a dozen things that could be made better about this, and there's at least 7 things that are good about it. One of my favorite things I like to remember when I'm like really ticked off about the slow pace of change is the center striping line had to be invented. That was not a given. That does not naturally occur. And I think it was invented in California. There's like an interesting early California feminist history around it. I think it was a woman in like Imperial Valley who was like, we should do this. Like, people have won changes. There's a lot of things to want. You can want a lot of different types of changes. You could look at this road and say, I want there to be more buses or a train or bus shelters or better transfers or bike lanes or drivers to not be, sociopathic or crosswalks. Like, there's all these types of things you could identify. And you could say a large number of change. So you could say, I want this to have, this picture is missing 4 crosswalks. And you could say, oh, well, I only want one thing, which is crosswalks, and I want 4 of them. So there's a lot of different types of things to want a number of things. And really importantly, for people in this group particularly, which is a group of people who care about a lot of things, great news. You can fight for multiple things at once. In fact, it is easier to fight for multiple things at once because then, just to pick on Dan and Dave, because I know you're a soft, you're an easy crowd, you're not going to get offended. Like, that if Dan says, well, we really need a bike lane here, and Dave says, well, we really need this transit policy change, you don't need to fight each other. You can say, great, let's work on that. We can both do these things. And this keys into the how do you do this for the long term? But multiple campaigns reinforce each other because there is always an ebb and flow in a campaign. And so saying, okay, let's get people excited about this thing now. We'll keep them involved with this other thing that's like in a little bit of a fallow period. It's a little bit slower now. And we continue to push and continue to build. So don't feel like you only have to pick one thing. I will say from the someone who overly picks fights, keep it under 10. Keep it under 10 fights and you're going to have an easier time. I would say around 5 or 6 is when I start becoming a Mr. Grumpy Pants. So like definitely 3 to 4 range is it's a good amount. And maybe you're someone, you come to Petaluma Urban Chat and you come to this book and you're like, well, there's a lot of things I want. I like a lot of the stuff, but I'm having a hard time articulating that. Like if someone shows you that picture of Breezewood, Pennsylvania, with all the drive-throughs and all the big roads, you just get like mad at all of it. Or you see a picture of, some mystical place in Europe where you're like, I want all of that. Like it is good to clarify that, because you can't go to a governor or a county supervisor or mayor and say, I want that, please. Like you have to be a lot more specific. And so one exercise, and this comes from my book that I recommend, is just asking clarifying questions. What is a pain point? What is, if you had a magic wand, what's something you could do? What's something you care about that's under attack? What's something, this is one of my favorite ones. What's something you feel like would be an easy change to win? You don't have to pick a fight just because it's a hard fight. Pick a fight because they think would be an easy fight. That's always good. What's a small change that would make you really happy? Because at the end of the day, you're in charge of your life. And so there's a certain level that you get to set your own misery dial. And you're like, well, I want to focus on this thing that seems winnable and easy and impactful. And maybe occasionally I'll throw a couple of Hail Marys or go for some really hard thing. But you get to pick. So once you pick these things, you start to identify decision makers. Generally speaking, if it's going to cost some money or need a policy, then it's going to be a legislative body you need to talk to. That's city councils, county supervisors, state legislators, things like that. If it might take a government agency or staff to enact, then you're going to need administrative leaders. That's like the mayors, the governors, department heads, things like that. When in doubt, yell at elected officials, not staff. Generally speaking, we're all friends here. The highway lobby Caltrans is terrible and does a lot of terrible things. It's not the highway lobby, they're the highway builder. Technically, they're the transportation wing of our state. There's a lot you can win by working with Caltrans and getting them to be better. But fundamentally, your state senator, your assembly member, decides how much money Caltrans has. And so, yes, talk to Caltrans, but talk to your elected officials who have the regulatory and financial power over these entities. It's a lot easier to hold an elected official accountable. They're generally one person than it is to hold like a nebulous bureaucracy. And we could talk more about that later if folks have questions. So once you know who can make the thing that you want happen, time to focus in. That's making a plan, which chapter 3 of my book really focuses on context and connections, all this stuff. So is there an official process? Is there a timeline? If you're saying, oh, we want to make sure that Smart has better bike lockers, at their stations. Like, okay, well, is there a board meeting? Is there a subcommittee about bike access? When do they meet? Do they make that decision every Q3 about the next year? Like, what happens? Let's talk about it. When can you weigh in? How can you do that? One thing that's extremely important to remember, especially for nice, lovely urbanists like the crowd here and urban chat folks here, here's how to do things within the process. That is always helpful to do. And you should always be pushing on the outside of that process. We can talk more about that. But one thing I like to think about public comment in particular is public comment is what happens on stage. A lot of stuff happens backstage. And that isn't to say the fix is in or cigars or whatever, but it's to say a lot of council members generally have a feeling about what's going to happen before public comment happens. And so talk to them before public comment happens. That you don't have to say, well, I'm waiting for this day and that's when we weigh in. Like, talk to them beforehand. Other people get the advice of like, hey, you have to actually weigh in on public comment, that some people are like overly focused on the like what happens behind the scenes. But I've talked to a lot of activists across the country in transportation spaces. We tend to be very focused on like what happens at public comment, and public comment's great. Talk to people before and outside of that. And for some of your things, there might not be an official agenda or to-do list. There might not be an official time. This happens particularly when you're talking with businesses. For example, if you're trying to get businesses to support bike racks in front of their store or better bus policy, there's not a part in the business owner's day where they say, now for the next 5 minutes, I think about bikes and transportation as it relates to my business. Like, it's never on the agenda. And so you have to put it on the agenda. And then another big part is understanding your area's specific cultural and historical context. You are doing this in Petaluma. You are not doing this in another county. You're not in Napa. You're not in Solano. You're not in San Francisco. You're not in Santa Rosa. Like that matters. That has different abilities, different things. And so it's always good to like be thinking about that. Um, and just as like a fun example, in Petaluma, you have your, I believe it's I'm gonna get this wrong. It's the Egg and Butter Parade Festival. Butter and Egg. Wait,
Butter and eggs
Butter and Egg.
day.
Yeah. So this is the part where you know that I'm an interloper, being like, oh, here I am passing out flyers at the Eggs and Butter Festival, and people are like, this guy, he's just he's in the pocket of big bike. But like you having that knowledge makes it a lot easier when you're trying to say, here's this thing, and like if we want to take there's plenty of examples when out-of-towners or big moneyed interests show up and try to pretend that something's locally desired and they get that stuff wrong. You all, as your experts, like you get to flex that. You say, oh, we know to be at that and be at the porch festivals and all that fun stuff. Because all these things can really supercharge your stuff. They can really hinder it. If you get it wrong, if you like mismatch culturally, a lot of other things. Then you need to choose your tools. Now you have a stronger sense. This is an example of a petition a mentee of mine did around bus lanes in their neighborhood. You got to show that your demand's popular. So Dan wants this thing. Great. Who else wants this thing? A petition's really great at saying, here's all the people who want it. When you deliver a petition, you can deliver the whole names, you deliver it with the people. Maybe it's a coalition letter, which is essentially a petition signed by a bunch of groups or businesses. Rally saying, here's 50 people, here's 100 people, we all want that thing. Phone calls, calling the elected official, having that happen. Public comments are a way of showing that. Getting in the media all the time, doing special events, and so much more. There's a lot of ways to show that what you want is popular, that not only are you right, but what you want is popular. And chapter 7 of the book focuses very much on tactics and how to do some of these things, how to understand, how to say, when do you want to do a rally versus when you want to do a petition, how do these all work together? And then you're going to need to actually craft your message. Like, what are you actually going to say? There's a big couple of things about crafting your message. One is, what are you going to say? Like, what you say really is important for helping your audience understand what this means for them. And you got to use commonly understood words. You all are the kind of people who are at this event. You're the kind of people who might read a book like mine. If you want to win, you got to fight. A Guide to Effective Transportation Advocacy. You are experts. You are deep. You have a deep level of expertise, and it's important that you correct for that. You might know what a bollard is. Most people don't. You might know what a speed hump is. Most people don't. People don't know these types of things. They don't know what's out there, automatic speed limiters, any of that stuff. It is extremely important to always use words that people can understand, especially when you're flyering or passing or talking at a table or any of that stuff. Even the word urban, people are like, well, what does urban mean? Like, well, does urban mean the Tenderloin or does urban mean downtown Petaluma? Maybe people have different opinions about that thing. Both are wonderful places, but maybe people in Petaluma have different feelings about that. The other part is how you're saying this. Where are you getting your message across? Are you putting in the print or flyer? It's a very different thing to have flyers up around town versus social media ads. That really changes how it's going to be received and what you need to say. And then lastly about message, who you're saying it to. You have different audiences. And this is a thing that a lot of times when groups are making plans, that this is a place where they can often have very big conflict because you're trying to talk to different audiences. And the thing that's really helpful to remember is we can talk to multiple audiences. Like a lot of times when you're starting a campaign, you're not talking to the general population. You're talking to the people who they just need an excuse to join up. The people who like the thing that you like, the people who aren't going to say, oh, bicyclists are ruining everything everywhere. A lot of times you're not talking to them. Like you want to put out a message so if they see it, they're not going to come throw bricks at your door. But like recognizing that you don't always have to be aiming for every audience. And in fact, a big thing to do is crafting messages per audience so you have an easier time. There's a question about working with the businesses, making business specific communications, having that, crafting your message for those businesses, and recognizing that each business is very different. My favorite story around this is I'm pushing for a bike lane in my community. It's happening in the next year, a few years. There's two flower shops on the street. They're across the street from each other. One of them likes it, and one of them hates it. It's like, okay, it's not, oh, I need to talk to florists differently than I talk to cafes. It's the people on that side of the street have a different design thing than the people on the other side of the street. Guess what? One side loses a lot more parking than the other, and that's the side that really hates it. But just tailoring your message, you're allowed to do that. And so it's good to do it. And then we get to the fun part. Now that you have your messages, you have your rough ideas of what you want, who you talk to, all these things. Now you need to get people involved. So as Dan was saying, my book is not, I didn't invent the concept of the ladder of engagement. This has been around for decades. But the ladder of engagement is simply the act of, or this mental framework of saying, okay, well, we have this general public, they're not engaged. How do we move them up? How do we get them more engaged? For any of you who have a sales or marketing background, it's just very similar to the sales funnel. It just more humanizing, I guess, than a sales funnel as a concept. We could talk about collaborative sales being a wonderful thing later. But so, you have the general public, you're trying to get them to take that first step up, become a supporter. How are they going to signal support? Once they get up there, then you say, okay, well, do you want to volunteer? Like, thank you for signing this petition. Can you help pass this out so we get more petition signers? Now they're a volunteer. And then a leader, which is kind of the pinnacle of all this, are people who take new initiative, people who take on the initiative to do something new. So for example, your campaign in Petaluma, maybe you just speak English. Maybe you're not a privileged enough person to speak more than one language. Maybe you only speak one language. And someone in your crew might say, oh, well, I speak Spanish. We should expand and do this in Spanish and translate that through. And you don't have to speak Spanish for your campaign to speak Spanish. Like, you could say, great. Would you like to lead on that aspect? And here's all these different resources and translate and all that kind of stuff. And so it's really important to get people involved. You have to both show that your demand is popular and share the workload. And because we are a Bay Area crowd, I'm going to go out of my way to throw shade on ChatGPT and those types of things. There's often a urge in some of our spaces to say, wait, you want to write an email? I'll just ask Chat, hey, Chat, what's a flyer look like for Petaluma for this? Like, so one, ChatGPT is very likely going to get your margarine and egg festival wrong. Much like ChatGPT is almost certainly going to get that flyer wrong because it's not a human and doesn't get it. The other thing is anytime you outsource labor to a hallucinating robot, you're preventing the opportunity from outsourcing it to a person who's like a supporter and they want to help out. And that's an opportunity to get someone as a volunteer, to bring someone as a leader, to show like, here's a lot of people. Because like the thing that gets politicians excited isn't when they see a picture of like all these people at a protest, isn't the fact that it's a picture. Like, you don't want to chat GPT like, hey, here's an AI drawing of a bunch of people holding my protest sign. They're like, cool, so I know that you like that drawing. And that's not a bunch of people. Like, it's about the people. So like, get people involved, and all that kind of good stuff. And a big part is because you also can't do it all yourself. And nor should you, as we're saying. There was a talk about like burnout question. We'll talk more, but you can't do everything. Your role is actually campaign director. So your role is very simple. Make sure that what needs to get done actually gets done. I'm going to say that again. Your role as an advocate is all these things is actually making sure that what needs to get done actually gets done. And until someone else takes ownership of that, it is your responsibility to get it done or it won't happen. And so for your campaigns, you might think, okay, well, we need to get a petition done. It's like, okay, great. You could write a petition. Someone else could edit it. You say, hey, I wrote a petition. I'm a terrible writer. Can you please edit this? And they say, great. Yeah, I hate writing from scratch. I'll edit. But if you don't do it yourself or get someone else to do it, it's not going to happen. And so a big thing to do is constantly ask for help, and make it very easy for people to help out. And as we're talking about coalitions, like, you need to have more than just your people on your side. Bus riders want more funding for buses. That's assumed. You do need to get your people together. Like, if you are saying, I speak on behalf of everyone who ever rides a bike in Petaluma or a scooter or any of that stuff. Like, if you're not able to show that that is true, I could say that I represent every bike rider in Petaluma. It's like, okay, that's not true. And if you want to convince politicians and all these other people, you do need to be able to demonstrate it. So you need to get more groups involved. Getting different groups that together working to a unified goal, that's what a coalition is. And a lot of times, coalition might sound like a big fancy schmancy word. That's all it is. And so here's just an example of a coalition letter I had in the Bay Area. Sorry, so used to talking to people who are like really far away. So here, a coalition I did in Oakland, in my home in the East Bay. And in this coalition, this was about traffic violence prevention. We are trying to get a little bit of money from the police department, which has a huge, huge budget, into street safety, because in Oakland, it's about a third of all violent deaths are street safety deaths instead of murders. And so we're saying, okay, well, we should be spending money commensurate to the scale of the issue here. And so we got the environmentalists on, that's the Sierra Club. We had the bike people, Bike East Bay. We had a rollout crew, that's kind of younger bike people. We had the Nurses Association. Evidently getting hit by cars is a medical issue, not just a bike issue. We had East Bay Center for the Blind. We had a Clausen House, a different disability justice group. We had Lighthouse, a different blind association for the blind. The Catholic Church got involved because it is bad for when people get hit by cars. The Democratic Party is against people getting hit by cars. And the teachers union, because it's bad for students if they get hit by cars. And so a big part is this got people's attention. Like, those bike people don't like getting hit by cars. They have that weird, they're just weird that way. That happened. But when you say high mayor, high elected official, did you know blind people don't like getting hit by cars? Like, do you know nurses don't like it? Like, they're like, oh wow, I care about some of these groups more than I care about you. Okay, cool. You've got my attention. And so getting a coalition together is big. And a huge advantage we have in the space as transportation advocates is it's really easy to find who's going to probably want to get on board with our stuff. They're probably the people using it, like the person waiting for a bus, the person getting on their bike, that stuff. These are good people to talk to. And when you're talking about coalition partners, a nice thing is transportation impacts pretty much everyone. And so when you're thinking about your specific issue, think about like who benefits from this and whose values align with your thing. Because you might not think, to pick on the Catholic Church for a second, they're probably not coming to this from a perspective of like, oh, we need to get people in pews, and if they get hit by a car, they're not going to show up. They're probably not thinking in such a like mercenary way. But they're like, no, we have these bigger values, and our values of safety in our community. And there's a lot of people who have big values that align with you. And one thing to always remember is that no group is fully united. So occasionally, maybe you'll go talk to a chamber of commerce or a downtown business improvement district or something like that. And they might say, well, we disagree. What they're really saying is, hey, the 4 people who are the board members in charge of that thing decide they don't like it. And maybe they think the vibes are off and the rest of their members don't like it. But they didn't immediately ask every member of theirs what they think. You can go talk to the individual businesses. So no group is ever fully united. And then lastly, you have to hold its decision makers accountable. So this is a shot from that petition and that coalition letter being delivered to its council member, Nikki Bass, who's now a county supervisor. We did this with media. We did it with a lot of people. So you have to deliver your demands, or else they're going to, they don't know that you made a change.org petition. Okay, like you can't send them the link. They'll say, okay, I see that there's a thermometer on this website and it says 1 billion people in Petaluma sign this. That doesn't check out. Like, you have to actually prove this to them by showing up with a lot of people and showing up with the thing. And maybe you want to do it in other ways, but you have to demonstrate this. Another good way of turning on the pressure is putting them in the spotlight, getting them on the record, getting them in the news, getting the photos. Because it's easy for a politician to say, hey, here I am in this room with you all, and I secretly agree with you. And if you don't hear me talking about it in public, it's because I'm like really doing this other thing. You're like, no, I need you to talk about this in public. Don't promise me the world in private and then ignore me in public. And if they do ignore you or they do say no, try again. Use different approaches. Reframe your message to align with their values. Maybe they aren't interested in street safety that much because there hasn't been enough dead kids yet. Maybe they do care more about the business community or preserving farmland or anything like that. And you might need to apply more pressure. You have to show them, hey, we're serious. Because it's very easy for someone to say, hey, I want this thing. I'm being recorded, an anecdote I will share from someone who I will not name names, but I know a person who used to work for a Congress member, and we talked about like how many calls they got and how many emails and all this stuff. And I said, how do you even prioritize? There's just so much volume. And he said, if a person doesn't email us twice, I wouldn't even respond. He's like, the number of people who will send you one email about a thing is almost infinite. The number of people who will follow up like a week later, be like, hi, following up, da da da, I care about this thing. He's like, that is a tenth of that. If any of you have ever, uh, it's kind of like the thank you note vibe. Like the number of people who send a thank you note is a dwindling number, and so you know you have to consistently apply pressure, and that might involve stronger messaging. That might be saying, "Hey, look, originally we are saying we want our town to be safer for everyone, and now we're saying, hey, the mayor's ignoring our calls for a safer town." And that's like, ooh, they're a little bit more out there. That gets a little bit more punchy. And maybe it's a more compelling messenger. Dan's a wonderful person. Maybe Dan's not the most convincing person to talk with. Maybe there's someone else that a person's like, I like more than Dan. And the true thing to say, I like Dan a lot. Dan's great. But, it's perfectly fine if you're like, look, the mayor of Oakland doesn't care so much about me personally. And so if I want her to listen to my message, I try to make sure that someone she listens to or cares says it. That's all it is. And, we get to make public attention. We get to put something in the news, and that's very fun. And a big part about this is escalating based on their response. So, to tell a quick story, which I elaborate on a couple times in the book, Governor Gavin Newsom, a few years ago, tried to kill transit in California at a time where budgets for transit agencies were really tight. Gavin Newsom tried to take billions of dollars away from them. We spent many, many months getting very loud, building a huge coalition across the state, getting tens of thousands of people to call in, doing all this sort of stuff to get him to change his mind. And it wasn't happening. We're talking about context, like it was about June, which is getting very close to when the final budget is done, and we weren't seeing movement on this. So we had to get a lot louder. And this was very well known that this was a crisis. This was in a lot of newspapers. People understood that this was a crisis. And because Gavin Newsom was insistent on killing transit, a couple of people involved with the campaign decided to make that very obvious and very clear to people. And so Gavin Newsom, the person dressed in a Gavin Newsom outfit, took a baseball bat and beat the stuffing out of a Caltrain, giant cardboard train, as you can see in the picture, while people behind them with a huge sign that said Gavin Newsom is killing transit to make sure the message didn't get lost were there as they blocked a freeway entrance for a few minutes, and they let people in and out occasionally. But that way, when the helicopters overhead and the news were covering it, they said, well, what's happening? Why is there all this traffic? They say, oh, the reason why there's so much traffic is because Gavin Newsom's killing transit. And the reason why that worked and why even the Economist said shows up protests work is because that was at the end of the campaign, not at the start of the campaign. It was at the moment where all this attention, like it is very easy to block traffic. Doing it in a way that people decide that that is the compelling and good thing is hard. And so you have to make sure you're escalating based on the response. And we could talk about this as it relates to traffic violence, particularly later, because that's a whole thing. And sometimes you might have a politician, they say, yes, they say, I love that. I agree. I'm 100% on board. And then nothing changes. So step one, make sure that they actually did the thing they said they'd do. Sometimes people say one thing, but they do another thing. And it's just really important to always just make sure and double check that. But the other thing is assuming they actually did, like they're not all powerful. Like it is a politician could say, yeah, I voted for the thing and I'm one of 7 votes. And everyone else voted down and they voted down and I got censured for it or something. Like you don't want them to just vote for the thing. You want the thing to pass. And so recognize that they're often part of this ecosystem of decision makers. And they might say yes, or the mayor might say yes, or there's all these different points. You need all of it. The same thing for your state rep, like your state assembly member, your state senator might say yes. They say, I totally support this concept. I don't have the votes in Sacramento, but I'll introduce the bill and we'll see it get killed. And there we go. I did the thing. And so your role is looking for the bottleneck and resolving it. And that's just kind of essentially rinse and repeating from there. And that will often mean going back and running the campaign again and again and again, or finding different coalition partners saying, okay, great, we have our assembly member who said they'd introduce the bill, but now we need to make sure that Carter's assembly member and Mia Bonta, that she agrees with that. And we need to make sure that Eli's in LA and all these other people. Okay, let's keep working on this. So you got to keep looking for what that bottleneck is and keep solving. So to recap before we get into the questions, you can win. If you want to win, you do have to fight. So pick a clear goal, rally others to support it, keep pushing, stay persistent, innovate, try new things, celebrate your progress along the way. And you get 20% off with my book if you're like, this is cool, I would like this written in front of me so I can mark it up with a pen and dog ear pages. You get that at Island Press with discount code FIGHT for 20% off. And so with that, I'm going to go with the Q&A with the crew. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And yes, as I said, this is one that's going to sit on my shelf and get reread occasionally because I need reminders of these things.
Yeah.
A couple of like related to particular campaigns, one of which Charlene is waging in our neighborhood. At some point, you mentioned in the book addressing the culture of the elected and the culture of the voters, and I'd maybe talk a little bit about the culture of staff. A particular example is we've known for a decade and a half at this point that anything but left aligned sharrows kill people.
Yeah.
Um, our city traffic engineers know this because I've had the conversations with them. We very recently got some bloody right-aligned sharrows in town. I assume that's because it didn't get spec'd out deeply enough, and some contractor put them in the place where they've always put them. Any ideas about trying to address that culture and where to apply pressure?
Yeah. And that's a big pinata of a question. So I'm going to take a couple of different whacks at it from a few different angles. Because it is a huge one and it's everywhere. So I think two of the big things to think about when coming to the question of like dealing with staff and all this stuff. One is they're not all powerful. They're part of a system and they don't want to get fired. And so elected officials are this huge part of this. And like, yes, elected officials aren't legally allowed to direct staff in a lot of towns and things like that. They could just defund a department that they don't like. Like elected officials do plenty of things. So one level is like, if you're asking staff to stick their neck out, it's your job to make sure it doesn't get chopped off. And so one of the great ways to ensure that staff does stick their neck is that you help show them that they're extremely safe to do so. Very much helping coax a little scared little rabbit out of a hole, that type of thing. Like that's one part of just all of that. There's other parts. Another big thing is to keep in mind is you are stuck with each other. You're not stuck with them. They're not just stuck with you. You're stuck with each other. And it is a small town. Like Bedlam is a decently sized place, but it's a small town. And so one thing is it's very, just to keep mixing metaphors, it's very hard to put the toothpaste back in the tube. So, at the end of the day, a big thing is how do you make sure they keep listening? Like, how do you get them to listen to you is also related to the question of how do you get them to keep listening to you, which does in fact mean listening to them. People tend to like when it's a conversation, not so much a big speechifying with webinars excluded. But helping kind of go with that slowly. And a big part about that, why I remember that you have each other, is relationship with staff is a multi-year relationship. Like I know you are in a long-term relationship, you're in several other long-term relationships. And this fact that like one of the ways that relationships with staff go very sour is when a person tries to like basically treats their one meeting as if it's the one meeting they're ever going to have. And you're like, well, here's 1,000 things that I hate, and here's 20 things that need to be done different, and they all need to be done yesterday. And by the way, here's the name of 50 kids who are dead because your predecessor and your entire sector, like that. And what that teaches them is like, whoa, this person's intense. I'm going to ignore them. They're like, this is too much. I'm going to ignore them. Because the other part is like, what trouble have they gotten into for ignoring you so far? Like, this is the way things are. That's fine. It's not fine. We all know that. And this is why chapter 1 of my book helps have this whole section about we're all radicals, all of us here, whether you know it or not, whether you like that term or not. The things that we want are like literally radical departures. If you want everyone in town to be able to walk, bike, or easily get to where they want without a car, that is like statistically unusual. And so we are asking staff to join us in being a bunch of weirdos, is like one way of thinking about it. And so that means easing them along, building the relationship, and maybe you're over it. Maybe that you're like, cool, I hate all of this. I'm not the person. You don't have to be the person that has it. Like that someone else could be the velvet glove to your iron fist, but like someone does need to have that. You do need to have that type of relationship. And so the third part, like, which is like a more on the practical level, less on these kind of big, huge parts, is they have degrees, like they have expertise in this thing, and you are coming in there saying, like one is coming in there saying, hey, I saw this thing online. Did you know in Belgium they do it this way? And they're like, in Belgium they have mayonnaise on their fries, which we should all try and grade. But like they have their own world that's in their mind. And so a big part of having this as a conversation is, making sure that you are bringing the evidence and the evidence that they're asking for or that they're interested in. That the examples that you're pointing out aren't Belgium, aren't even Oakland. It's like, well, what's happening in Santa Rosa? What's happening in Larkspur? Like helping them realize that you are not asking them to be a bunch of big weirdos. And then like lastly, before moving on to other questions, like depending on your person you're talking to, they might want the things you want. Like some people, and there's a huge divide happening in the like professional planner world of uh, basically people who are like, I'm in this for a job. I was told freeways are great. And there's a lot of people who say, I care about this stuff. I was in Petaluma Urban Chat and I wanted to make a difference. So I got the job. I got inside of the system and now I'm like the one good person fighting, and like yelling at that person is really a bad idea. It's saying to that person like, hey, I'm your ally here. How can I help you? What can I do? um so yes, it's a big question, a lot of answers. That's a short version. Chapter 6 of my book is entirely about, not entirely, but it's very much focuses on that, so I recommend that.
Thanks. We'll loop back to my additional stuff in a moment, but let's get Eric Leland's. In your experience, what groups did you expect would join a coalition that did not, and what did you learn from this?
Yeah, I um am being recorded. I forget if I mentioned it by name in the book. So whatever. One of the things that Trans Bay Coalition, my group, works on, it's like kind of on our shelf. We kind of like chip away at it like so many woodworking projects in the backyard, which just kind of looks at us, is the electrification of Capital Corridor. That's a whole thing, needs to be done. Someone needs to work on it, and we're very much the group to kind of do it. And a year or so ago, I talked to the electrical, like the IBEW, the electrical worker union of like Santa Clara County, to basically be like, you would probably want this. This is probably a lot of jobs for you. Like, you're a huge political entity. Like, yeah, yeah. And my talk to them, I got on their agenda, which huge win. I was 5 minutes. I had like a 5 minute slot on their like whole day long presentation, all their policy thing. And it was just so clear that they could not care less. Like I was just random person getting the meeting, whatever, while they were doing their other stuff. And they said, oh, okay, send us the slides, we'll think about it. It was kind of a like, that's nice here, move along type of thing. And for me, one of the big things I learned from it that was a really strong reminder is it's people aren't just waiting around for you to talk to them. Like they have their own plans for the political power, for their goals. They have their own schedule. And like, what we are doing essentially is saying, hey, you know how you're overworked and underpaid and you have too many things on your agenda and all these stuff? Here's another thing. And so it's really easy for a person to be like, cool, I'm not gonna do that. Like a lot of times we are coming with homework assignments to our coalition partners, to our elected official allies, things like that. And the more work that we can do to make it easy for them to do anything, the more that they will do something. And that was a big swing with them of being like, maybe they'll take this on. But and the other part that also kind of reminded me is the I should have gone to the Solano County Electrical Worker Union, which I still will, but Solano County has a lot more mileage that needs electrifying, and the Santa Clara County has a much smaller one. And I think one thing that's always important for us to remember, much like how Friends of Smart is different than Petaluma Urban Chat is different than North Bay Transit Riders, like different groups have very different interests, and so like finding the ones who are very much more aligned with you, you're gonna have a lot easier time. So yeah, so good question, Eric.
Mary, take it away.
Yeah, I really want to thank you. I feel like your book is a cookbook. It's a total recipe, just what we ought to do. Um, I we are blessed in Petaluma with a terrific city council. We have wonderful staff, and yet it seems like simple things, to me they seem simple, kind of don't get done.
Mm-hmm.
And our city often runs into trouble when they try to do something like new bike lanes on D
Mm-hmm.
Street, Bike Boulevard on Fifth Street. And we actually got them in, I think, 2022 to adopt as one of the top 10 issues they were going to deal with as a city council,
Mm-hmm.
a quick build kit. And to
Nice.
me, a quick build would give neighbors a chance to work together on saying, this is something we think would work and look good,
Mm-hmm.
and we're willing to actually get out there and do something. And that definitely was a situation where we thought they were agreeing to one thing, and
Mm-hmm.
that really didn't happen. Their idea of quick build is stuff that I think most people in the city think are done deals, and that in
Mm-hmm.
itself makes a lot of people unhappy with
Yeah.
the direction. So to me, this just feels like a very nebulous sort of thing, because what we want is, how can we get these terrific people who are working
Mm-hmm.
hard, often working for projects like our active transportation plan, which is
Mm-hmm.
decade or so in the future, and it's going to be great. But in the meantime, how do we say, let us work with the neighbors. Let
Mm-hmm.
us make sure before you put bike lanes on D Street that the people who actually ride bikes all the time think this is a great idea. Um,
Yeah.
that
And so
that's my question. How
yeah.
I want to be a team
Mm-hmm.
with the city. How do we make that happen?
Yes. So you're particularly going to like chapter 6 if you haven't gotten a copy yet, because that's very specifically like working with elected officials in these types of ways. And there's two, yeah, I would say there's three big things to keep in mind on this one to do. And the first is, it is, like, when in doubt, build power. Like when in doubt, get more people on your side, demonstrating that, all that kind of good stuff. That um, you know, people like making it very clear that they will do this to thunderous applause versus, hey, if you do this, we're not going to run you out of town on a rail. Like the more that they understand thunderous applause will happen, the more likely that things will go a little bit faster. And I think one big part that we as a movement, I think we've, one of my controversial takes, I think we've actually won a lot more on the culture fight than we think, but we need to actually win the power fight. So we'll have like people in office who will say, hey, I love that thing you have. If I do that, I'm gonna get killed. Or I'm gonna get like, I'm gonna have to move away, all this, like, and in Oakland there was it was a board of education member, like literally had to move out of the county. Like, it is serious stuff. We live in a very intense political environment, as you all have probably noticed. And if you haven't noticed, I don't want to burst that bubble. Everything's great. And so, like, you kind of, when in doubt, when you're like, why isn't this happening as much? A big thing is like, okay, how do we double the number of people on our side? And that might be a petition or coalition letter, any of that stuff that just shows like, hey, come here, join us, you're safe here. The other part is, as you're saying, like it's a hard job being an elected official who is it is hard to do the work well. It's pretty the job itself is actually fairly straightforward because there is like very few job requirements, like all that kind of stuff. If you want to do it poorly, it's super easy. But if you want to do it really well, like writing policy is hard. That is legal language. That's all it's up. And so one big part is doing that work yourself. And maybe you don't know how to do it. And that's fine. It's like working with your team, getting language from other cities, and giving it to them. So, for example, uh, I'm affiliated with a group of people that builds benches for bus stops and communities. That is, and one thing that I'm working with that group of those people who build them and install them is we're working to get it legalized as a process. And so we had to draft the policy to give to the city of Richmond to say to council member Jamila Brown, who's wonderful, who like is on our team. We're like, here's the policy, introduce it at a meeting, talk to the people about it, here you go. And they did. It was a whole fight. And we went and testified, and I brought seniors and all these people out there so that they did to thunderous applause. And then I reached out to the city staff to be like, okay, here's what the permit policy should look like. Here's this work. And so the more that we do that work, the easier of a time they're going to have, which is unfortunate because, doing work, it takes work. It'd be nicer to not do it. But like, that's a big part too, that we kind of have to help them lace up the shoes and shove them out the door. And then the last part is sometimes you got to boop them on the nose. Like if a politician does all these things and they're still not doing it, like sometimes you got to say, hey, look, you didn't do the thing, and we are going to notice, and we're going to be less happy about that, and we're not going to donate as much or host that fundraiser or whatever the thing is. Like, we're allowed to say, hey, this kitten's got claws. Like, and I think that's something that's important to understand as a group. And maybe it's one of you, like maybe it's a group does something and an individual is still the one back channeling and all that stuff, and like kind of recognizing that we have many, like, oh, of course Dan's going to say the angry thing, Dan's always angry, or whatever, and like, but saying, oh, but now Mary's the one who's kind of like sending that signal message that's a little more like, we're really disappointed in you, like, oh no, that's, oh, Dan's always angry, but Mary, like knowing how to do that and like kind of playing that with your team is really important. Because the other part is like, if they say, oh, well, what are you going to do? You love me. You hate like everyone else who'd run to replace me sucks. And you're like, yeah, I just will work on other things. Like when you're up for reelection or you're doing your thing, you didn't do anything. So I'll just go work on a state senate campaign or go do this other thing or counties, like reminding them that you have options. Like you're actually, unlike the city staff, are like, you're not stuck together. And I think this is something that is, I think in a certain way, our like presidential focus system like really messes us up on a local level where you're like, what, you have two options, what are you going to do? And here you're like, look, you didn't do the thing. I asked you to do it. I campaigned, I did all the stuff. Okay, guess what the next person's going to do? Not the thing. Like, I don't need to help you win a re-election if you're going to continue to not do the work. And so, to recap, build more power, work closely with them, like put in more of that effort, and then boop them on the nose if that is needed. And chapter 6 has more details. Yeah.
Eric, go for it.
Thank you. I'll speak this one. So your Richmond example was kind of overlaps with my question. You talked about how it was easier to influence like a single politician or politicians perhaps over people's staff and like a bureaucracy because the bureaucracy is like big and maybe difficult. We're in like I forget what the term is, something, I think it's called weak mayoral system. Anyway, it's a system where like the staff or the city manager has a lot of power.
Yeah.
Do you have examples where influencing a ministerial decision was more effective or effective for you over influencing a policymaker? Are there like any trends or just anything you could share there?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer of a maximalist approach. I'm not saying do one or the other. I'm saying do both. And so you always got to do both. I think one thing is recognizing even in a weak system that like council still sets policy, they still set budget. And like maybe you have fewer buttons to push, but still like being able to credibly threaten those buttons. But the other thing is to the point about like just building raw political power, like that helps everything. If you're saying, well, here's 10 businesses, 20 organizations, and 200 people or 1,000 people, they all want this thing, and they're the people on the street and all that stuff. They're like, oh, okay, I get that we probably won't get into so much trouble. And some of the issues might be, oh, we don't have the money for it, or we don't have the liability, or technically that's a Caltrans thing, or what, like they might have some, but yes, but type of thing, which chapter 3 talks about like much more specifically. And one thing to do is like resolve those issues. They say, okay, well, we would love to, but we don't have the money. And the state of California has plenty of money, the county has plenty of money, and the city has plenty of money. And maybe you're going to lose friends or gain different friends if you say, hey, this street safety program should be paid out of the police budget. Like when you reallocate budget, take $5 million from the police budget, because in theory, the police budget is about saving lives. This is going to save lives, put it there. And if you get all those people before who still signed on to say that, and they're like, okay, that shows them that they're safe to do it. If it's like, oh, Caltrans is being a jerk, it's like, okay, get your state elected official involved, like work on this stuff. And so recognizing that it's either a knot or an ecosystem. I like thinking of it as an ecosystem of like, okay, here's all these things, and they're big players in it, but they have their own needs, they have their own wants, and so you always need to be navigating that. And like external pressure works on a lot of people, like getting local news talking about this stuff, helping people understand that, getting good coverage, that cranks up the pressure, because a lot of times they're saying you're the weird one and you want something different. If you're like, actually no, you're hey, magisterial person, like you're actually the weird one holding back our town, like everyone else wants this thing, you're the weird one, like that helps change some minds. Patricia.
Whoops. There
Yep.
she is.
Yeah.
Before.
Yeah. So my quandary is, living here in Petaluma, there's always public input to changes, and I appreciate that. But I take the Golden Gate Transit down to San Francisco twice, 3 times a month. I'm in off hours. I'm not a commuter, right? And so that bus is going away in April. And so I'm supposed to take the train, but the train doesn't go beyond what, 9 o'clock? Yeah. So I'm just kind of like, okay, I guess I'm going to drive to Novato now and park my car in Trader Joe's parking lot and then get on the bus, because the bus is going to, and there was never input. I just remember getting the meeting in whenever it was, saying, oh, this is going to happen.
Yeah.
And it's like, and I asked them things like, okay, if the train is late, is the bus going to wait? If the bus is late, is the train going to wait? When you're having to make those kind of connections. So I'm just at a quandary to how to stop it.
Yeah, this is the part where you have me at a disadvantage, because I'm actually extremely familiar with this, where like when I'm giving my talks to like people on the East Coast, like I'm like, oh yeah, like that. I don't have strong feelings about that. So this is the mascots plan that we're talking about, and I have a lot of thoughts about mascot plan. So let me do author and whatever. I'll just answer it as the person, because I have many identities all at once that go into effect here. So the mascot plan, to recap, basically all the bus agencies in the North Bay recently have been like, oh well, we do have a train now. Maybe we should do something about that train with our routes. Not a bad thought. That is, in fact, a good thought to have. And part of the thought was like, okay, should we just stop running any service that is parallel to it and just have everyone, take the train down rather than run the bus on 101? Which, to an extent, makes some sort of sense. However, as Patricia's pointing out, it's like, well, but what about this? What about that? What about this other thing? What about this other thing? Like, there's a lot of other issues that come up once that happens. Like, when it works really well. But when it doesn't work, there's like huge problems. And now there's no late night service and things like that. And so The short version, no, there is no short version, a medium long version, just to that. So to take a big step back, there's a couple of things that's happening here. One is there's a plan, it's happening, whether you like it or lump it, it's happening. North Bay Transit Riders, which is a group my group has been helping step up, like they've been talking to SMART and the county officials to kind of say like raise a bunch of issues. Like one, there's almost no analysis of what this means for paratransit. Paratransit service is linked to bus service, not to train service a lot of times. And they're just like, needs to be a lot more clarity. Like they're just that. One of the other ones is what happens if SMART shuts down? Like what not saying like what if the regional measure doesn't happen? Like what if a person parks their F-250 on the track because people do things? Are like what is our ability to flex the buses, things like that. Yes, Patricia?
And I'll just say, I now have alerts from Smart, and it's like 2-3 times a week they're late. They're sending it, and they didn't have service on Thanksgiving at all.
Yeah.
I was like, what do you mean you don't have service today? I mean, you're not on a holiday. Anyway, okay.
And so part of this is, so one from a like a vague cushion, like, so SMART is going to get a bunch more resources and be improving service as part of that. Like they're aware that like, oh, this thing that was sort of like a fun train is about to become like a much more serious piece of infrastructure. And there's a certain level where it's going to step up. But to your point, like there's some other structural issues. And so there's a few things. One, the SMART measure or the measure to fund SMART needs to pass. Like that needs to be funded or else we're in real huge issues. So that's one of those like, cool, maybe they're not your favorite people in the world. They still need to exist and the world is better with them. The other part is, getting like more state funding and putting more pressure on your county electeds because they, running late night bus service is not that hard. Like they have the buses, like it's a money question. And so getting loud about that is very helpful and being particular about it, not in the like my particular bus, but it's like, oh, here are these issues overall. And so North Bay Transit Riders is working on getting louder about that. And that could be something of like helping raise this issue because one thing to like, I don't know, like a larger point about this is our political system is very comfortable with you suffering. Our world is kind of comfortable with you suffering. If it is a you problem, and I don't mean Patricia, I mean like the one in general, like if it's just your problem, okay, cool, that's a you problem, then you have to come up with the solution to your problem. The more that you make your problem other people's problems, and specifically people who have a lot of political power or people who are attached to large budgets, the more that you make this isn't our problem. This is, someone's running for, people are running for governor. There's a million people running for governor now. And, they want the votes in Petaluma. They want the stuff. And you say, okay, what are you going to do to help transit in Petaluma? They'll say, wow, I've never been asked that question before in my entire life. They say, yeah, no, well, here's our endorsement form. Here's our thing. Like making your problem other people's problem and doing that collectively. So it's not just I'm one person with this problem, but here's 50 people or 100 people. Here's all this stuff. That really helps people recognize like, oh, shoot, you're right. We should be putting a little bit more money to this program from this other thing to get the later night service, or we should be doing more routes, or hey, that Trader Joe's parking lot ends up as super important. We need better lighting there. Like helping people see, thank you, Eric, for putting that in, helping people see what these solutions are. Because the other part is, so there's both the problems and the solutions. And so one level is we need to make sure that the problem is very clear, not just like the sharpness of the problem to us as individuals, but like the extent of number of people who experience it and how hard it is for them. The other part is pointing out either if you are on team, there are many solutions to this, or there's only one solution to this. I'm generally a fan of like, if I don't have a particular solution I'm rooting for, but just like, hey, this sucks, you need to do something about this specific thing. That's a good thing to do. That does mean you kind of have to be happy with whatever they say. So another part is like, the more solutions you recommend, the more specific you can get, the more you're saying, I actually have a shopping list for you. 100,000 people want you to do this thing. Here are the 3 things to do. And one of them might be easy, one that might be hard, one that might be nearly impossible. but recognizing that this is a multi-agency thing, a multi-county thing, and unfortunately, it's not a small thing. I think then the last part for this, kind of to this other point of like, what happens when the government does something I don't like, and they did it in kind of a sleazy way, and or a way that I wasn't particularly happy with. Like a big part is being very forward looking. That you, the thing that an apology is nice, but that doesn't actually solve anything. So if they say like what you don't want from them necessarily is an email that just says, well, here's actually all the 20,000 community engagement meetings we had, and oh, you missed the schedule, and oh, it went to your spam. Like you're like, great, okay, I'm still mad though. Like, I still don't have my bus. And so focusing the conversation on what you actually want to solve is always really important. Which I know can be very hard sometimes. I myself have some trouble with this when I'm like particularly a bit hot-headed about a thing. But that's also a part where it's so great to be working with a group, other part, because it might be something where, great, now we need someone else to be the face on this, and like you're really excellent at, or you or a person's really excellent at identifying all the flaws, and that someone else is good at translating that and taking out all the curse words in that letter, and then saying, hey, let's get 5 churches and synagogues and mosques to sign on. Here you go. So that's a key part too.
And I'll just say that, I did write Connolly, an email, and it's like, oh, but I only sent it once, right? I was
Yeah.
expecting a response, and now it's been, so I'm like, oh, okay, I got to do it every week. Okay, I'm
Well,
the pestering person. So,
well,
okay.
and I want to provide one. I'm so glad you phrased that. So Connolly needs to get thousands of emails about this or anything. He doesn't necessarily need thousands of emails from you. He needs maybe 3 emails from you,
Okay.
5, 2 from Dave, 1 from Dan, Eric, like that, a big email that says, here's urban chat saying this thing, here's a bunch of groups. Because um, one thing about when a person is very persistent in that regard, in, I'd say, frankly, in our current political environment, I think in the past, your mileage may vary. I think we're in this kind of new era where they're like, cool, I'm going to just ignore you, because it's not that hard to set up an email, like an automatic email service thing where you're like, cool, I'll just send out an email automatically once a week to this random elected official. And they're like, and it just gets ignored. And so, but in that persistence, like maybe sending an email, maybe next time, like, send a follow-up email. And while you do all the other things, you could do multiple things at once, like call their office, say, hey, just checking, I sent you 2 emails. I know you're really busy. Did you get this? Hey, I'm going to your office next week. Like escalating based off of intensity is something you can do as an individual. And, and the other part is be prepared for when you actually do get through the door. Because that's like, before going to the next question, it can be very, sometimes it can feel like the whole campaign is just getting the meeting. And you want the meeting for the purpose. And so I've like been in the room where people are like, holy shit, we didn't expect to have like, now what? You're like, oh, we want you to hear us. Like, oh, we heard you. It's like, okay, no, we didn't want you to hear you. We want you to do the thing. And so just like always kind of don't get distracted if you get into this fancy office in Sacramento and things like that. But yeah, no, it's a big one. Thank you. Eric, I don't know where we are in time, Dan. I could talk about this forever. I wrote a whole book about it. I could talk about it so much, but I figured Dan will keep me on time.
Eric is great, and I don't think we have particular time other than you got to go to sleep at some point. But I'm
There we
also
go.
realizing that some of my questions probably can get passed around here locally, and we can bang them off your book rather than you specifically. Eric, go for it.
Thank you. Sorry for all the questions. I'm curious what if you have an example of like a particularly intractable audience you're trying to influence, and what um, stories or persuasive arguments you use to turn them around. Just recognizing that we're all dealing with audiences that are somewhat powerful and also quite intractable in their opinions.
Yeah. I'm being recorded. So my go-to, okay, so my go-to one when I think about this type of thing is my intractable audiences. I don't actually think of as politicians very often. Like I think of politicians as not necessarily tractable, but like it's a it's a fairly straightforward, like it's a political question, it's a math problem to a certain level. Like okay, if making Dan happy means I make 50,000 people unhappy, okay, I'm fine with Dan being unhappy unless Dan has the power of 60,000 people. Like, like there's just a certain level where that, I think where the place where like the really intractable thing comes in to when I think about that is the people who I'm trying to get engaging in politics. So for 17 years, I worked in the solar industry in California, big rooftop solar fan. And for 7 of those years, I worked for the Solar Lobby of California, California Solar and Storage Association, ran the membership department, where I did member organizing essentially. And a big part of that work was getting small businesses to do all sorts of things, politically speaking. And, that would be come to a protest in Sacramento, come to a protest in San Francisco at the CPUC. And there'd be parts where I'm calling like small business owners in Fresno who are members of our association, dues paying members, with, got them to pay dues, all this helpful stuff. And say, hey, in 3 weeks, I really need you to bring your whole team to San Francisco in person to say, to wait in line for an hour and a half, and you'll have 2 minutes to say to a group of CPUC commissioners who are barely paying attention, the sentence and talk to them about your stuff. And they would say, "Are you effing kidding me? Like, how is that possibly a good use of time? Can't I just send them a call? Like, what are you talking about?" And we'd have to have the conversation. They're like, "Wait, didn't last week you said I had to show up in Sacramento?" I was like, "Yeah, but that was a protest. That was this week it's CPUC in San Francisco." They're like, "Can I send a junior person?" Like, no, it has to be you as the owner of the business to talk about your small business. And Eric, unfortunately the answer is really annoying. The answer is like have the real conversation. Like it is the like very deeply put in their shoes and be like, look, I totally get that this costs you tens of that. Like this is a hard thing. I get why this is hard. Let's like naming the stuff. Like actually, you can't say, oh, I understand. Say, I totally get. Hey, bus ride, driver, like bus rider in Petaluma. I totally get why it seems like politicians never care what you have to say, and that signing a petition seems like such a waste of time because we have a political system that doesn't care about you and everything about this shows up. However, right now, in 3 days, we have this big opportunity. I'm going to turn in your signature with everyone else's and all this thing. We have a whole room of people, and I really need you to sign on board. Da 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 da. Like having the big conversation, I think, is really important. And a part of this, and this connects to, I think someone asked about businesses. One part about these things that's like kind of good to keep in mind is a lot of times you need, like, when it comes to a politician, like, okay, so you need Gavin Newsom to vote for the thing or not veto it. Okay. You need these state senators to vote for it. And then besides that, you start getting to like, well, I just need like a lot of people. You don't necessarily need that bus rider. You need 100 people, 500 people. That bus rider is part of those 500 people. But there's a certain level where you're like, cool, this is just not happening. And I'm going to just move on and I'm going to leave this positively so that if I talk to them again next week, because we're stuck together, that's that. But like helping them recognize that like kind of knowing when to move on. Because the other part is if we sit there and I say, hey, Eric, I'm going to convince you to I'm going to get you to change your mind. I mean, we're the Bay Area hippy dippy community notwithstanding, like, which I'm part of, but like generally people are like, no, I don't like that. I'm pretty certain in who I am and all that stuff. And so, having it as a conversation. And the other part is making sure, especially for a crowd like this, where like there's a lot of things that we want in the world. Like we want smart to be better and the bus to be better and the bike lanes and the speed bumps and the housing and all of this stuff. We are often just talking to a person about one thing. Um, And so someone might say a weird other thing, uh, and they say, "Oh yeah, I like the bike lanes because I love gentrification in my community." You're like, "Well, I'm glad that you support this thing. I'm going to keep a lot of thoughts to myself." Like there's just that part we're recognizing that we are not here to find the love of our lives. And you might have arguments with the love of your life. I've been married for a couple of years. We've occasionally arguments happen, but like I think one part where people like get really tricked up about this is that like it does feel so personal, it does feel so real, and so like that part when there is disagreement, like that can be really hard. And it's not dismissive. I think of it as like a deeply respectful thing, but it's kind of comes across as dismissive when you're like, okay, cool, like that local business doesn't care. I'm going to talk to the next one, but I'm going to do this in a nice way, and maybe they'll come around when they see that everyone else has come around. And so, yeah, like it is a tough, like you have to actually give it the try. You have to really bring a lot more empathy and energy and that stuff. And maybe you don't feel like doing it. Like as an example, like the flower shops, like one of my favorite pizza shops is on the place where I want to get the bike lane. When I went to every business to get coalition letter sign-ons for this, I did not go to that pizza shop because like I was not emotionally ready to, in theory, hear that they hated it and like cut them off. Like, and I've explicitly told people in our coalition, like, hey, if anyone goes to that shop and asks, like, I need to not know. Um, and and there was like another person who like was when I talked to a barber shop and we had a really hard conversation, and he was like one of those, I don't think kids should be biking. He's like, I bike, the kids don't need to bike, and I have really strong feelings about that. And so I like gracefully exited the conversation. And I was like, hey, can somebody else in like a month or two come back and have that conversation? And like a person who, is read very differently demographically than I am, like went back and they had a very sweet conversation. They want him on board. And so like it's a hard part of recognizing like when it might not be you as the person, especially, whatever. But yeah, so great question. Chapters 3, 4, and 5 really focus on that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I think we have time for one more question before I probably actually need to get to my dinner.
Okay, well, I appreciate you hanging out, and since I don't see any other hands here, at some point you say if you knock on everyone's door in your street to see who else would support installing a speed bump, and it turns out Charlene has. And now we have the problem of we can't walk down the street with being asked about when are we going to get the speed bump.
Yeah.
So maybe a little bit about managing expectations and making sure things are broader and ways to stay engaged with those people when not
Yeah.
out
So
of the queue.
one part is yeah, that's so great. In fact, we have this flyering day. We have this thing. Like um there's two parts of this problem. One is like you feel bad about the speed bump not happening, and there's a time thing, and what do we do? The other part is like, oh, my neighbors are talking to me about a thing that I don't want them to talk to me about. One of the best, they're solved very similarly. Give them a homework assignment. You say, hey, when do we get the speed bump? You say, oh yeah, in fact, here's a stack of flyers. Do you mind passing them out? Do you mind doing this thing? Like, and maybe they'll be gracious and happy about it, or maybe they won't like that. But either case, they'll either start talking to you more in more productive way because now you're like, it you don't have the magic wand, like, and helping them understand that's not your magic wand, and that's like, yeah, so we need to work it. But they're asking, they show they care. That's something interesting. And so if you say, great, I love that question. I wrote an op-ed. Can you actually submit it? Or here's the stuff. They'll either do the stuff and that's great and that's wonderful, or they'll say, oh man, if I bring up this, if I ask Dan how it's going or Charlene how it's going, they're gonna give me a homework assignment. I'm gonna not go to their holiday party because they're gonna give me homework and I didn't do my homework, which solves that other problem. But like I think that part is helpful. Another thing is, um, you should keep your kind of community, your supporters aware of what's going on. So whether that's like an email or if like, hey folks, just letting you know, we submitted the petition, here's the story, da 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 da. Or hey folks, come to my house, we're gonna do a big shindig get together party thing, talk about that. And we're gonna have the elected official come here and give the update. And now you're not like you should never be the person in the hot seat. It's getting the other people in the hot seat who deserve to be. And so, you know, treating that as the gift that it is, even if it is annoying or frustrating, or you're like, I'm holding a pizza and this is just not the, I'm like clearly doing something else right now. But having a homework assignment, keeping them up to speed, and creating opportunities for them to get involved and show other people that excitement, like that's to bring us to a close. To think like I mean, I'm still very much at the stage where I love when people are like, hey, Carter, how's the book going? Like, that's great. I love the book. I'm very happy to talk about it. I know the book's great. Bill McKibben, climate champion, he said the book's great. Like, a lot of people have said the book's great. It's great. Tell other people that the book's great. Like, definitely tell me. Like, I love hearing that. Post it on the Amazon review. There's already great reviews. Tell other people. So that kind of stuff, that like helping people, they have that energy. That's great. It's like, cool. Yeah, I know that speed bump's really important. Tell other people that thing. So yeah.
Cool. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Totally appreciate your time. And yeah, we'll almost certainly run into you at various other events.
I'm sure we will.
And Dave, do you have anything else to add?
Just I'll add my thanks on top of yours, Carter. That was a great evening. Thanks for spending the time with us. And for
Great.
everyone who's here, I hope you took good notes. Hope you watch the recording when it gets online. And let's keep having conversations about this topic.
Yeah, I'm
So,
excited to work with you all, whether it's through my Trans-Bay Coalition hat or connecting with NBTR. Please pick up a copy of the book. And you might know some other people in other parts of the country or world who might be interested. Please point them my way. I put my email in the chat. And the nice thing, kind of lastly, like every single one of us has an incentive for more people to be good at this. Like one way to get your speed bump is making sure that the people who want speed bumps anywhere throughout California are better advocates for it, so that the state budget has a big old speed bump budget. Like one thing that is very fun about this is we are all on the same team. And I don't mean just you all, like the people in Missouri that I'm talking to in Pittsburgh, like we have the same Congress, like all that stuff. Like the more that we fight and win together, the more that we all benefit. So I'm excited to keep working with you all and keep fighting with you all.
Awesome.
thanks, Carter.
Thank you
Thanks,
very much.
team. Thanks for having me.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for-
Cheers.
Good night, all.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.